The height of Disney's animation renaissance was The Lion King, and that film grossed over $312 million in 1994. And then, the descent began. Pocahontas did well, but not nearly as well as The Lion King. Then came Hunchback of Notre Dame, which made less money than Pocahontas. However, the indisputable evidence of their decline was Hercules in 1997, which had a $35 million advertising budget and an $85 million production budget. In the US, Hercules didn't even break the $100 million mark. Hercules marked the beginning of the end for 2D animation at Disney, which would ultimately reach its conclusion with Home on the Range in 2003. From 1997 to the end, there would be glimmers of hope for 2D animation. One of these glimmers was Mulan. The film broke with the Disney formula in many ways, but perhaps most significantly, it wasn't made in the historic Disney Burbank studio. It was made instead inside of a theme park. Tony Bancroft, director, Mulan.
From day one, I was probably 3 years old, and I knew I was going to be a cartoonist or an artist of some kind. I have a twin brother, Tom Bancroft, and he and I always loved to draw. We were just artists from day one, just doodlers and very competitive too with it. You know, just like some brothers are competitive with sports like soccer and whatever. For us, it was always drawing. We were looking over each other's shoulders and just, you know, iron sharpens iron. So it was actually a really good thing in retrospect. We were both doing comic strips. You know, we wanted to do a twin comic strip, believe it or not. And we didn't discover animation until we got into going to a city college because we were trying to figure out, well, do we even need to go to college if we're going to do a comic strip? And we just need to probably just work and create our comic strips. As we were just trying to kind of decide which way to go, and our parents were kind of pushing for college, of course. And this guy, Eric Stefani, who became a good friend of ours, was doing these clay animated videos. We got to know him, and he asked us to do a video during the summer together, and we created our first animation, stop motion clay film to a music video. We loved animation, but you know, to both of us, it was like rocket science. There was some kind of higher math that we couldn't figure out how animation was done, and there must have been math involved. We just knew it. It was some kind of alchemy that we just couldn't figure out. So it wasn't until we actually did that clay animated film that one summer in City College that, boom, all of a sudden, you know, we're bit by the bug, and we started researching, like, can we go to school for this, and what school would that be? And back then, this was mid 80s, I guess it was. Yeah, there was only 2 schools probably in the country that had really notable animation programs, and the biggest one was right near our house. We lived in Orange County, like I said, so Cal Arts, California Institute of the Arts, is in Valencia, California, and we found out about that, and we were like, that's it, we got to go there. And then we found out how much it costs, and we're like, oh my gosh, 2 students, how's my single mother going to put us through college? She had just gotten married, and we were living by the grace of God and our stepdad, and, you know, kind of barely making it. So we worked really hard that summer, and then my mom had some savings put aside, and we were able to afford the very first year at Cal Arts. But for us, it was a stepping stone to getting a job. That's all school was for us, really. It was about, you know, getting the training, putting together the portfolio that we needed so that we can actually maybe get into Disney, which was our dream. We made it through a year and a half, and then Disney came calling, looking for interns to start with a new internship for the brand new, it was just opening, Disney MGM Studios in Orlando, Florida. And Tom and I applied, and we got into the internship. We were the only sophomores that were accepted. They were only looking at juniors and seniors. We had to beg our way in. Well, at the time, Bill Matthews was in charge of the development program and hiring students and helping to nurture them, and the internship program. And Bill was very well known in feature animation. He was like, we used to call him Uncle Bill or Uncle Winky. I don't know why Winky, but we went to Bill and we said, look, we're passionate about this, and this is our one chance. If you don't let us into showing our portfolio and don't let us have this opportunity for this internship, we may not be here next year because we literally have no more money. You may never see us again, or we may never have the opportunity to show our portfolio again to you because we won't be here anymore. And that touched his heart. And he said, okay, you know, we'll work it out. No problem. You guys show. They reviewed our portfolio. Bill actually said, I really couldn't tell the difference between who is who, so you're both in. You know, it was just like, you guys, your portfolios look just like you do. They're exactly the same, so you're both in. And I've never been so happy as to when I got accepted into Disney. It was a huge, huge day. And then boom, after a 9-week internship, Tom and I were working in Orlando, Florida, and we were employees like 5 and 6 of the Orlando, Florida studio with only about 30 employees in the beginning. And it was awesome. It was a dream come true.
Barry Cook, director, Mulan.
I was working at Hanna-Barbera Studios. My first job in animation, I was an assistant animator, cleaning up shots for Saturday morning cartoon work. And a good friend of mine, Mike Lessa, who went on to be a visual effects supervisor for many years at Disney. So Mike gave me a call one day and said, hey, they're making this movie over at Disney and they're looking for assistant animators. And I'm like, oh, well, what is it? I mean, is it like a cartoon? Is it like a feature animated thing? Or what is it? He said, no, it's a sort of a live action combo. It's called Tron. And I said, I don't know what that is. He said, I just signed a contract with Rob Bakshi, so I can't do the film. So I'm recommending you highly. If you're interested in the job, call this guy, Lee Dyer. And so I called him and met with him, and he's like, if Mike says you're good, you're good. Come on over. So it was meant to be a temporary job. In a couple of months' time, I was promoted to being an animator, doing visual effects, because they just needed all hands on deck they could get. One thing led to another, and that 6-month job, I ended up staying at Disney 22 and a half years. That's the way it went. That's the way I got in the door. We had opened the studio in Florida, and I'd worked for Disney in Burbank for about 9 or 10 years prior to the studio opening here in Orlando in 1989. Yeah, there were 7 of us that were sort of considered journeymen, and then the rest of the crew was comprised of people who had just gone through the Disney internship and had been hired.
One of these new recruits to Florida was Barry's future co-director, Tony Bancroft, and Tony's brother, Tom.
Oh, yeah, he and his brother both. Yeah, they were there, and we used to razz them and, give them a hard time. But, they were cool guys and certainly enthusiastic and very, very talented artists, both of them. And then a crew of seasoned guys, men and women from people like Rick Sluter, my favorite art director of all time. So that was sort of the makeup of the studio there.
Here we were working at a new studio, and to tell you the truth, when the Disney MGM studios opened, there was a lot of fanfare because one, okay, it's a working studio within a theme park, right? But we weren't employees of the theme park, we were employees of the studio, which was centered in Burbank, California, but we're working all the way in Orlando inside of a theme park. So there was a lot of interesting elements to that you don't have just getting a job at a animation studio. Like there was a policy at the parks where anybody that worked at the parks had to have short hair and they couldn't have facial hair, and there was a dressing policy and you had to wear a uniform. So they allowed us animation folks to come in. If we had a facial hair when we were working and applying for the job in California, they would let us come in with that. But if we shaved before we actually got on the plane to Florida, we had to stay unshaven. That was kind of the deal. And because of that, the park people didn't like us very much. As a matter of fact, there was times when we would go out to our cars at night, and we had a special parking lot just for us too. And some people would have their cars keyed or their tires slashed by these, theme park people that were just so upset at us because we were just like the elite and treated differently. That's how they saw us. We weren't trying to, be upstarts or anything like that or make them feel bad about their lot in life. It just that was just what it was. And we felt bad that we weren't treated differently, but we weren't asking not to be treated differently either. We had certain expectations too, like, well, we are making animated movies that make a lot of money. We have specially trained gifts and abilities that we're using and skill sets. So we knew that there was a reason that we were being treated differently than somebody that served popcorn in the parks. But I don't know. I mean, I think it was just a short-term thing. It died down after a while, and people just kind of left us alone. And there was friendships that developed on the other side of the glass. And that's kind of how it was. I mean, it was always the other side of the glass. There was us and then them kind of the whole time. Yeah, we sat in front of glass all day long. Like there was a glass lined wall that went along one side of the building. It was all strategically positioned so that the guests, as they came through, they would see the progression of animation by walking through this corridor behind us. It was definitely weird. It was definitely weird at first, being in that environment and having people every 15 minutes. There was a new group of people that would come through the lobby and come by those glass windows. And it was just all day long from the beginning to the end of our shifts. After a while, we called it moving moving wallpaper. And there was definitely guys behind the glass that sometimes they would sit there and they would watch us like all day. And those were the true artists. Some of them were just huge fans and wanted to be on the other side of the glass with us. Some of those people became employees of animation later on.
We were only going to do short films. That was sort of the only promise that the studio could give us. It was going to start with some Roger Rabbit cartoons, and they wanted to do a couple more of those, and they wanted to do maybe some more Mickey Mouse cartoons or Goofy shorts or something. Just some sort of basic ideas for doing short cartoons there. But what happened very quickly as we began taking on parts of different features. What a lot of people don't know is that at the Florida studio, they did about 25 minutes of Beauty and the Beast there, probably 20 minutes of Lion King. They did some ink and paint work, was the first job they did on finishing up Little Mermaid. Rob Minkoff was there before he directed Lion King, and he was doing Roger Rabbit short, Trail Mix-Up, and that was the first one to come in the door. Rob and I would stay there late at night looking at edits and looking at animation tests and trying to time them out to make them visually funnier, just playing with the timing and stuff like that. So we really got along well, and he began to trust me a lot for a lot of stuff, and so he really recommended me to direct the third and last Roger Rabbit short when he was hired away to do Lion King. That's how I got that job. And I had made an experimental short before then in Florida called Off His Rockers. But that was a short film that combined a CG character and a hand-drawn character.
There was an opportunity that arose on Rescuers Down Under. And at the time, there was a lot of us junior cleanup people were all really interested in moving up the ladder and becoming an animator. And in Florida, because it was so small, they created one opportunity on the next film, which was Rescuers Down Under, to become an animating assistant. And so that person got to work with Mark Henn and train, and they would actually get scenes on the next feature. There was about 8 of us that probably did animation tests to try out for this opportunity, this one position. Aaron Blaise got the position, and I was happy for him, but also bummed for Tom and I. We both really wanted it. And I was told later that I was like number 2 in line. And I was like so passionate and desiring to be an animator there at Disney and wanting to move up. I knew in California they had more opportunities, and they were actually looking for 4 animating assistants instead of 1 in Florida. There was 4 openings in Burbank, California. So I said, can you put mine into the running for the position in California? If I get it, I'll leave Florida and I'll move back. That's how much I want to do this. I got one of those 4 positions for Rescuers Down Under. There was a part of me that wanted to be part of the big show. The main studio in Burbank was considered the main studio, the big studio. The Florida studio was the B team. They were always doing parts of the animated features and parts of this. And so they were more like the, kind of the rookies. They were always looked that way. So I went back to Burbank, California, and got the job and started animating on Rescuers Down Under. And I moved up quite quick. I don't think it's by my own credit, make it sound like it's all about me. For some reason, I was definitely there at a good time, and God just opened up doors of opportunity for me. And I climbed the ladder very quickly. I was with Will Finn, who's an absolutely outstanding supervising animator, a good friend of mine. And Will was so kind to me, gave me great scenes on each of the films that we worked on. So I got promoted quickly. I worked with them as an animating assistant on Beauty and the Beast on Cogsworth. And then he would give me really good dialogue scenes, which was kind of unheard of, because you start out as an animating assistant, you tend to do the scenes that Will doesn't want to do, like booger animation, scenes where Cogsworth and Lumiere and Mrs. Potts are the size of boogers on the screen. And so they're just hopping around after Beast. I literally did this scene where hey, come back, wait, Beast, and they're running up the stairs after Beast. And he's this big shape going up the stairs in the scene. And they're these little guys in the background. But it was Will who gave me some of the scenes that he would normally do. And because of that, I had a reel of animation to show to the review board. So I got promoted on Beauty and the Beast to full-fledged animator halfway through. And then Aladdin, I worked with Will again on Iago, the parrot. And then after Aladdin, I went on to supervise. I actually became a supervising animator on The Lion King. And then it was kind of one thing after another. And I kept getting promoted. Animators on an animated feature, just like actors on a live action feature by a director, they're cast by the director based on their skill sets. Tom Cruise, the hero. Okay, he's going to always do the big, hero guy, or there's Jack Black's always going to do the comedy guy or the comedy sidekick and stuff. I was definitely a comedy guy and kind of stereotyped as a comedy guy and doing comedy characters. I'd done Cogsworth and Iago and Frank the Frill-Necked Lizard even before that with Will. So I thought after coming off of Aladdin and doing Iago the parrot that maybe I'll have a chance to do the bird. I heard there was a bird in The Lion King named Zazu, and I thought, okay, well, I just did a bird, so maybe the directors will see that I can, it's a comedy character and it's a bird. I'm a shoo-in. I thought maybe if I'm lucky, I'm a shoo-in for that. And then they turned around and they gave me Pumbaa, which was already like way more than I expected. I didn't even ask for Pumbaa because I knew it was just outside of my stratosphere of possibilities. But that opportunity came to me, and even though I was scared to death, I took it. I'm like, okay, I'm going to just draw the heck out of this warthog, and I'm going to try and make it my own, and hopefully they'll love it. But they did, and Lion King took off in such a huge way, unexpected, unbeknownst to all of us at the studio at the time. Lion King broke $100 million before the first weekend. It was just huge, phenomenal success. We know that now, but at the time it was like such a surprise. Because it was such a huge success, my name started to come up more, and like everybody is on Lion King, everybody became successful or, were talked about or were celebrated because of that film's success.
Lion King was mammoth, groundbreaking, and culture-defining. It grossed $1 billion in merchandise sales and $312 million at the box office, and was the highest-grossing film of the year. Around the same time, Barry Cook was in Florida, and the Florida studio members were growing tired of being seen and treated as Burbank's lackey.
We were sort of, banging our plates on the table saying, give us a feature, we want to do a feature. And so Burbank is looking down at us like, I don't know if you guys are ready for that. We're like, we're ready, we want to do it. But yeah, I really felt like we can do this. And we all felt like there was a real, Peter Schneider always called it esprit de corps, a group of people with a singular sort of mindset. The Florida studio was a very, very special place. It was just a place where everyone just shoulder to shoulder, we were moving the same mountain and we were working together to do it. And everybody respected each other no matter what part of it they had in it. Didn't matter what it was. And I think we had a little bit to prove maybe because we were sort of little brother underneath the Burbank studio in some ways. Some people might call us, the bastard cousin or something, but I think we felt like we got, we can do this, and we know we can do it, and we're going to do it great, and we're going to do the best we can do. And it was like Spanky and Alfalfa putting on a show in their barn or something, but it just felt like that. We were just like, what a great opportunity and what a great moment in time to be in. And so finally, they asked me to begin developing a Mulan. The development department at Feature Animation had acquired the rights to a book, a children's book by Robert Sanssouci. It was The Legend of Mulan, something like that. It was just a small book, and it basically sort of outlined she was a kid and she went to war and she tricked the enemy and they all lived happily ever after. It was just a really short little thing. There was a Chinese opera, I think, that was a story of Mulan, and I think there was a sort of a poem that was written about her famous poem. There may have been some live action things or smaller TV things or something about her at that point, but none that we knew of, none that we could really find at the time. And you got to realize that was before we had everything on the internet. There wasn't really much to go on, but after the success of Lion King especially, it's like, oh, we've done a story that's set in Africa. Now let's do one that's set in another country, the Russian one, which became Frozen. It's originally Snow Queen, the Russian story. Basically, they had this, I don't know if it was a mandate, but just a notion of part of development. Instead of just the Anglo-European fairy tales like Snow White and so forth and so on, even Little Mermaid, whatever, let's see if we can tap into other countries' cultural stories and present a broader scope of stories around the world, So that was sort of the big idea that was sort of floating at the time. So this was sort of the most viable Chinese story, I think, that they could find. That's how it happened. Looking back in hindsight, it's remarkable that it's a story about a girl who is not a princess, number one. And I always say that emphatically when I say that to anybody who talks about her in those terms. She's not a princess. She never wanted to be a princess. She doesn't need a man. She doesn't want a man, although she sort of does begin to fall in love with a man, but it's not her goal like Little Mermaid. Oh, I just need a man if I could get legs. You know, that's her whole goal in life, which is sort of sad. But so it was way ahead of its time, I thought, in the way we were thinking about the story. And not to mention that, but it takes place during a war, and she's in a war. Can you imagine that for a pitch for a Disney animated film? It's a war story. You know, it's not a very likely scenario to be a successful movie. That wasn't something I introduced and said, let's do it. It was something that was inherent to the story, but looking back, it seems really an odd choice in a way for a Disney movie at that time to be set in a time of war. So I do applaud the foresight of, Peter Schneider, Tom Schumacher, the executives who were in charge at the time. Even Jeffrey Katzenberg was still at Disney when we began developing Mulan. He left about, he really gave the green light to start making the movie. And much less, it sort of broke away, I thought, a lot, and we wanted to break away from the mold, of the kind of stories Disney was telling. We were obligated to make it a musical. Disney said it will be a musical. Tony and I really didn't have a choice in that. Yes, there will be a funny sidekick character. Those sort of work. So there were some of those formulaic tropes that were paying off big time at that time that we adhered to. But looking back, we were breaking ground that Wonder Woman was breaking a year ago. We were breaking it 20 years ago, and hardly without notice and hardly without fanfare in some ways.
The story I heard for how I got onto Mulan as a director was that literally Mulan was this story that was germinating for a while. It was tagged as the Orlando, Florida studio's very first feature. It already had a director attached to it, Barry Cook, who was homegrown from Florida as a visual effects animator, and they were already saying, well, we want Barry to direct. He's in a good position for that. It's his time to direct a feature, and he's a homegrown boy from Orlando, Florida. It makes sense. But who do we have co-direct with him was the big question. They'd gone through quite a list of people, and it was one night as Lion King director Rob Minkoff was walking to his car at night, going out to the garage. He met up with Tom Schumacher, who was then the vice president of the development group. And Tom turns to Rob and says, we got this film, Fa Mulan, The Legend of Fa Mulan, as it was called back then. And, Barry's on as a director. We're looking for a co-director. I don't know. What do you think, Rob? Just throw out a name to me. Who do you think? And Rob looked at him and he said, well, what about Tony Bancroft? And I think it took Tom back a bit. And I think he was like, okay. I think they still looked at me as kind of a kid, a junior animator in some ways, even though I just supervised Pumbaa and all that. But because of the success of Lion King and other things, and I was known to be kind of outgoing, and obviously I talk a lot. So I think they liked that. And he thought about it and asked around other people. I heard he asked Don Hahn and other big staff members that, that were well regarded at the studio at the time. And everybody was positive about my name and about, me possibly doing it. So they asked me. I was shocked. It was kind of like the Pumbaa thing. It was that moment where this came out of left field. I didn't expect this. I wanted to direct, but at the time at the Disney Studios, it took like 10 years, 15 years to move up the ladder to become known as a director or have that possibility of becoming a director at Disney. They asked me at 5 years. I'd been at the studio for 5 years only. So I was really junior. There was things that I just didn't know yet. I haven't learned. My fear was, I don't know a lot about the story process, or how do I work with script writers, or what about down the road? I've never worked with camera. I've never worked with the ink and paint department and color and production designers. And there was so much that I was just petrified about, I guess. But my mom had always told Tom and I, if the door of opportunity opens, go through it. What's the worst that can happen? So I did.
For me, I was one of those guys. I'm not saying I am still, but as a younger man, I was highly ambitious, and I just felt like, who better? I'm your guy. I can do this. This is what I was born to do. That's just it's what I've always wanted to do since I was a very young child, is to make movies. And I felt like I'm getting into my element. I'm getting into the saddle I've always wanted to be in. This is where I'll thrive, and this is where I'll flourish. It's right here. This is the place for me. There's no better place for me on earth, right? This is it. Yeah, I didn't have any trepidation.
That was probably the scariest part of being asked to direct a Disney feature is, one, there's a lot that I don't know, but two, really the bigger and more immediate thing that was staring me in the face was I left the Florida studio as an animating assistant, and I was returning as a director. In Barry Cook's mind, I was now his equal, but in everybody else's mind, including my twin brother who stayed at the Florida studio and was now underneath me, I was their boss when I was considered one of the junior guys, the most junior guys when I left, and just in 5 years. And they didn't see me go through that transition. They weren't working by my side and seeing me grow into becoming a supervising animator and all that kind of stuff. They saw from a distance what was happening to me and promotions coming. But I learned very quickly that you don't gain admiration or praise or respect just overnight. And it really is something, respect has to be earned. And it's not because of the title that the company gives you. So I might have been called a director, but it was very hard walking into that position in the Orlando, Florida studio. You know, I had Barry Cook as my co-director. I looked to him and I tried to kind of go under his wing at first, for sure. We were definitely co-directors. It wasn't like he was my boss or he was the senior director and I was the junior director. I think maybe they wanted it to be that way, but I think our dynamic was that we were just more equals together. Barry and I went through a lot of ups and downs. It's funny because most of the features during that time in the 90s and stuff, and even coming after that, it was known, and it still is, that Disney prefers the two director model. And there's a reason for that. It's so Herculean amount of effort. There's so many different people and artists to be able to speak to, and to have one person do that is very, very difficult. It's only happened a couple times in the history and canon of Disney features. But I think there was a large part of Barry in the beginning that wanted to direct Mulan by himself. He thought, well, this is a Florida studio feature. It's the first one. Maybe we can do it different here in Florida, and maybe they'll just allow me to direct this myself. So when I was announced coming onto the picture, he knew that it was happening, but maybe not so open to it in the beginning.
Yeah, it was funny because I wasn't solicited for ideas for a co-director or a partner in the process. So basically we were assigned together and that's the way it happened. So when you've got a, arranged marriage sort of thing, it takes a while to fall in love with your partner, I think. And for me, that would be all that it was, probably. It was just like, you two guys are together on this movie, for better or worse, rich or poor, sickness and in health, go do it. And that's sort of what it was at first. And to me, that was like, gee, I don't know if I like this. And maybe it's just personality-wise, it maybe rubbed me the wrong way, that, I had no say in it or whatever, and had already been working on the project for a couple of years. But so I just think it was probably just that it was just, we had to find a way to work together and play off each other's strengths and collaborate in a creative and productive way. And I think probably, I don't really remember much, but I'm sure it was awkward at first. And I had been in the animation business for quite a long time, too, before then, a lot longer than Tony, just sort of around and in the industry and stuff. And, it was maybe just, a little hard for me personally to take on a partner, no matter who it was. I mean, nothing against Tony at all, but it could have been anybody, but to say, this is going to be your dancing partner, go. That was just probably a little hard for me to swallow, off the bat. So, yeah, I can imagine sort of, it being a little rough at the beginning.
And we come from two different worlds. He was a painter, he was a visual effects animator. That was his career at Disney. I come from character animation and cartooning and stuff. And so we saw things differently.
And a lot of the partnerships happen in different ways for different movies. Like Ron and John, they were sort of partners coming right out of school. They were sort of doing stuff together and loved working together, and they were sort of a natural partnership. And other partnerships were just put together, for different movies and what the studio felt was strengths and weaknesses. There was a perception that I had a weakness for character animation, and that's where Tony would be very helpful. But I don't think that perception was necessarily true because I'm not a character animator, but I look for performance and character performance and telling the story with the emotions of the scene, whether it's a hilarious scene or whether it's a serious scene. So I felt like I never had any problems giving animators direction on the scene. I wouldn't give them technical direction or speak the language of a surgeon, like, oh, the arc on that character's elbow should be a little tighter, just those kind of things, because that really still doesn't make any difference to me. But what are the characters communicating through their body language, through their emotional performance is all that matters to me. So that's all I was ever after. Tony's strength, as the studio saw it, was as a character animator and as a supervising character animator, and one that directors loved working with and one that did remarkable animation. So I think that was, his strength coming in. I don't think his strength was from a storytelling background. Mine was more, I was out of visual effects originally, but I had begun telling a lot of stories in the short films and that kind of stuff. And Office Rockers I wrote, and then Trail Mix-Up, I wrote a lot of it too. So I was sort of known for sort of story invention and known as a sort of natural storyteller, I guess. So I think that was my strength. And also just having a broad understanding of filmmaking process. Because I had worked on Captain EO, Michael Jackson's music video, and I'd worked with Michael directly on that for a while, doing visual effects and reshooting green screen stuff. I'd had some experience with big stars, and then just the whole process in the visual effects department. You saw all the animation that was done in the film. It always came across your desk, and you worked closely with camera department and a lot of times with editorial and layout departments. So in that department, you got great exposure to all the departments in the studio. So I think the people in effects animation were very well-rounded as filmmakers.
There was meetings in the beginning. The first year was really tough when we were together, and there would be little side jabs and looks and little snotty remarks to each other in meetings with full staff there and lots of people. It was affecting morale, and people could see that we were at odds. And that's not good. That's not good for anybody. And it was Pam Coates that really said, guys, you guys got to come together on this, and you guys can't be that way with each other. And some of it was just our immaturity. I think we were both kind of hurt, and we were both kind of lashing out at each other a little bit. So there was some of that. But creatively, we both wanted what was best. But at first, I think we both wanted our ideas to be what happened. I know I felt that way in the beginning. That was my immaturity. Directing a Disney film is a roller coaster. People think, oh, it's a dream come true, and oh, isn't that great? But there's so many responsibilities, pressures on you. There's so many days that you feel like just crap sometimes, and people don't like you, or they're upset at your viewpoints and your direction and your ideas, and you suck, and it really can wear on you, and a lot of times it's your bosses, the ones that should be supporting you, you feel the least supported by oftentimes. And so it's not all the staff, but sometimes it was the staff too, people underneath us. And I'm like, I just want the best for the film, and I just want everybody to get along and for us to do a good job. And I tried to be kind of the positive, funny guy, the morale guy, and it would just come back at me. There was days that I was just elated and felt like I was really contributing, and I was driving the ship, and this movie's going to be great, and my vision is really lending itself to making it great. And then there was other days where I felt like I'm just a glorified approver. I mean, just people have to kind of go through me, and I have to stamp it, and I'm just like a piece of the factory, and I didn't feel like I was really contributing. I just felt like I was almost in the way of people getting their scenes done. So there was days like that, but I think every director feels that way at some time or another, and it's always having to go back inside yourself and say, why am I doing this? What do I love about this story? And bringing that passion back and stirring that passion, and that's what keeps you going. But there was so much that I didn't know about directing that I had to learn along the way, how to share your vision for something, but also let people speak into that vision. There was so many balancing and creative balances that I had to learn, and managerial skills. And yeah, there was a point, because Barry and I we had this friction in the beginning. It was obvious, it was palatable, in the room. And there was a point where there was going to be a change made, or there needed to be a change made. And I was talked to, and I'm sure Barry was talked to at some point too, but I know I was talked to. And I told my boss one time, if it's better for the movie to fire me, or for me to step out of here or get out of here, I will. I'll do it right now. I'll leave. And I want to, if it means for a better movie, because I care too much about Mulan and this movie and this studio to get in the way. So if I'm getting in the way, you tell me and I'll go. And I don't think that my boss expected that. I think that really, me kind of throwing myself on the grenade all of a sudden when he kind of wanted to be a little threatening and say, you better buck up and do the, go the company way and whatever. I think that kind of surprised him. And he was just like, wow, wow. But it was because of that, I think, that they stepped up behind me even more. There was, in a way, in that kind of weird corporate way, he appreciated that about me. He appreciated that I was willing to step up for the film and say, look, take me out. I'll do it right now. I'll leave if that's what it means to make this movie better.
Well, I don't know that Tony was ever almost taken off the film. I can't confirm that. I don't know that. Look, every moment that you're doing a movie at Disney, you could be taken off the movie. Everybody is replaceable, and everybody in Hollywood's replaceable. That's what the studios in Hollywood have going for them. There is a line of starlets from Hollywood to the East Coast dying to get a break in movies. You know, there's not that many people who want to do feature animation, but there's still a line of those guys too, and very talented. So you know at any minute that they can fill your shoes. And that's another reason for two directors. If one gets hit by a bus, you can still work tomorrow. No one's indispensable. I mean, when you get to a point or to a level of recognition, which Disney directors don't get to intentionally, you know, the studio doesn't promote the director. They promote Walt Disney, you know, but if you were someone like a Tim Burton, your work is so signature in the way you do it. You would feel like, oh, I'm safe on this movie. But if you're working on one of the big animated feature films, sure, you could be replaced at any moment. There comes a moment when the studio does commit to its directors and they say, yeah, these are our guys. We're going through it. We're going through the battle. You know, it's just like going on the battlefield. It's like, these are our generals. Win or lose, these are the guys we're doing it with. So I think the studio does make a decision at some point. They're safe. We're going forward with. But until they're convinced of that, it's tentative every day for everybody. So sure, I was probably pulled off the movie 10 times and didn't know it. Hair's breadth away from something like that. But yeah, those are all sort of, you know, backroom conference discussions, you know.
I mean, I was pretty shaken by it. And later I was very angry for quite a while that people behind my back were talking about me and thinking that I was an issue or I was the issue when I felt like there was other issues that should have been talked about or brought up. I was probably at my all-time lowest after that because I felt pretty unappreciated. But you know, that's the great thing about life is that you move past those things and one day you come in and you feel very appreciated and you feel like we're doing a great thing here making this movie, and I'm working with an all-star team of some of the best, most wonderful people personality-wise, but also the greatest artists that I could ever work with in the world. That's what keeps you going. And it was really starting to understand each other and what each other wanted for the movie. And I started really opening to Barry's point of view of who Mulan was as a character. And it was shared by Chris Sanders and some of the other department heads. And I was like, okay, let's go that way. We're doing that. We're doing that. This is where we're going. And that really blossomed things to a point where, you know, by the second year, we were in meetings and totally in agreement with each other. And he could say something and I would just, you know, nod my head. I wouldn't have to add in, or I could say something and he would be totally supportive of it. We had departments that we supervised on our own and we trusted each other and didn't get into each other's business on those departments. It really came together for the benefit of Mulan.
Yeah, although admittedly, we didn't stay partners after that. We didn't, say we have to make films together for the rest of our lives. We're the new Coen brothers. We didn't fall in love to that degree. Who knows? We could make a movie together before it's all over with again. But at some point, we felt like, yeah, this is working. And like I said, the whole atmosphere in the Florida studio was one of real cooperation and collaboration. We just got into a groove of doing the work and loving the work we were doing. And I think it worked out really good.
I like to say that we really developed the same vision and the same passion for the movie and really became friends and buddies on the picture, whereas that doesn't always happen with directors that are put together. But we did. We fell in love with the movie and therefore each other. And it was our love and passion for Mulan, the character, that I think brought us together too. It took time, but it happened. What happens, I think, in any kind of crew is, but particularly when you're just starting and you're trying to earn that respect, is that they had to see that I cared more about the film than I did my ego, than being called a director. I just wanted to be part of the team. So what I discovered very quickly is to be a good director is to be a servant to the people that are underneath you. Don't treat them like they're underneath you. They're doing you a service. They're helping you to make the film that you want to make, to bring your vision to life. I just wanted to serve them, get out of their way when I needed to. I wanted to give them a piece of my mind creatively when I needed to lift them up. I wanted to push them so that they could do even better work than they ever expected, not to settle, and to inspire and to bring them up. And I feel like that's what I came to do. And ultimately, that's how I gained their respect. When they saw that I loved the film as much, if not more than they did, and I cared about them and their piece of it as much, if not more than they did, I earned their respect. At a point there, after that kind of dark time, we went right into overtime. We went right into, heavy deadlines and a lot of extra work and kind of the final push of the film. And when you get into that mode, you're either all in or all out. And you have to be all in to really give the film what it needs. And I just had to, as the director, obviously, you're the number one person that people are looking to for answers and to keep the ball rolling. And so I just had to make a choice to be all in. And Mulan became a real character to us, a real person, really, to a lot of us on the film. I used to tell my wife that she became kind of a mistress, I hate to say, but kind of the mistress that I would spend time with late at night because I was working so many hours. And that I was putting so much into her and trying to make her successful and be who I thought she could be. So it was like this weird dichotomy of a lover and father, if you will, to a character that doesn't exist, but in your mind really does. So, it was her. It was her that kept me going. It was the crew. It was the people. It was the studio. And I'm so glad I did. I look back at it now, and it was the best experience of my life. One of the hardest experiences of my life, probably the best one for sure. It was actually a really great time when I came on because they had gone through a really tough year, the very first year, trying to crack what the story was going to be and how to tell it. And they'd gone in some real odd directions, not good directions. Chris Sanders had come on as the head of story. Chris is a genius. He's just so creative and so wonderful. We were blessed to have him as our head of story. And when he came on, he started getting in the mix with the writers and conjuring up new and different ideas, and with Barry and everybody. And so by the time I came on, they had pretty much scrapped the last version of the film, the script, and they had written up a treatment, which was only like maybe 11 to 15 pages long, that represented the new direction of the story that they wanted to go in. And I loved it. It was engaging. There was a lot of good elements there, but we still ended up, even at that point, starting from almost from scratch again, we still reinvented the wheel several times. We cut characters out. We added characters. There was a lot of changes, but that redrafting of the story when I first came on, it at least had the core of what Mulan's story is, about a girl that loved her parents so much, her father particularly, that she would go off to war and maybe even die in his place. That was the emotional core of the story. It still is, but everything else had to be invented.
It was the moment when reflection had come and Chin-Yi Chang had storyboarded it. The final storyboards for that sequence was done by Dean Dubois, but Chin-Yi boarded the first version. Well, I actually thumbnailed the first version myself, but Chin-Yi drew sort of a beautiful, definitive, inspiring version of it. That whole thing was inspired when I was in China. We went to a place where all these bays were set up, and these bays are like the stone tablets. They're not gravestones, they're commemoration stones, and they have information about ancestors and tributes and honoring ancestors, and they put them up in places like these temples and courtyards and things like that. I was looking at these things, and I was noticing how highly reflective the surfaces were, and we could see our reflections in them. And if she's a girl sort of searching for identity, maybe her image could be like distorted in some, skinny in some, fat in some, like a funhouse mirror stretched out in some. We never really did that in the film, but that's where it started, the idea started. And then I thumbnailed something when I got back to California. I basically gave it to Chin-Yi as sort of a storyboarding assignment. That scene is the linchpin.
Jeffrey Katzenberg was leaving Disney because President Michael Eisner had ousted him, and Eisner would refuse to honor part of Katzenberg's contract, which stated that Katzenberg would get a percentage of the profits from each of the films that he worked on. Katzenberg would ultimately prevail in an out-of-court settlement, and in a one-finger salute to Disney, he formed DreamWorks.
Well, it was good and bad because when Jeffrey Katzenberg left, that's right when they restructured the story. The biggest change was we had a different music guy. We had Stephen Schwartz, who did all the music for Pocahontas, and Stephen was writing songs for it. And he had written I want to say 2 to 3 at least. But with the story restructure, they ended up getting thrown out. And on top of it, Jeffrey ended up stealing Stephen from Disney, and he was the main writer for Prince of Egypt, which was DreamWorks SKG's first animated feature. So Jeffrey took Stephen with him, which was at the time pretty crippling for Mulan. Fortunately, we got David Zippel and Matthew Wilder, 2 very new guys and fresh faces. They contributed the songs for us ultimately. At first, it was a big bump in the timeline for us.
You know, Jeffrey was more or less the captain of the ship at feature animation, you know, and it was funny because I was there the day Jeffrey Katzenberg entered the studio. I was there the day Michael Eisner entered the studio. I was there the day Frank Wells entered the studio. I was already working there. But to see this guy, Jeffrey Katzenberg, absolutely go from, I know nothing about animation, to falling in love with the art form, and he really did, and you could see it happening. He fell in love with the process that Walt Disney himself had created for developing and making these animated films. That was pretty cool. And he was very much supportive when Chris Sanders and myself had sort of come up with the core of the story we wanted to tell, and we pitched it to Jeffrey. Our immediate supervisors or president of feature animation, maybe they weren't as behind the version we wanted to tell, but Jeffrey really supported us on it. He was sort of tough, you know, sort of a tough creative boss to have, but he would always push you toward the better ideas, and that was part of his strength.
With Katzenberg gone, Michael Eisner was spending more and more time in feature animation, giving notes.
Unfortunately, yes, he did. And Eisner, being across the street, did want to see the reels at time to time. And, you know, it wasn't as much as Jeffrey was involved, but he did want to see it, and he definitely had his reactions. Jeffrey was definitely the better executive to show a creative piece to, because his ideas were very constructive. They really made sense. You know, he really thought about his notes and things like that, but he also was a creative mind that could contribute, you know, ideas. He wouldn't just say, "This isn't funny, guys, make it funnier." I mean, sometimes he would, but he would also come up with areas and ideas of what could make it funnier, or what could make a stronger dynamic or a relationship work or something. And they really made sense. He was good at that. He was good at story. Whereas Eisner, if you would just listen to like his overall overarching note, it was good, and you could really get something from that. The problem with him and executives like Eisner is that they often try and, instead of just giving you a general note, they try and give you a specific note with an idea of how to fix it. An example of that is early on, he saw our storyboard animatic of the whole feature, and one of his very first comments was, I think Shan Yu needs a song. Yeah, he should just, in the beginning, he should just break out with a song where he's talking about, you know, I'm going to kill the emperor. I'm going to take over China. Let's figure out what he's doing. You know, let's have a real villain song in the beginning. And we just looked at each other, Barry and I and the rest, and Chris Sanders and the producer. We were just aghast. We were like, oh my gosh, Eisner wants Shan Yu to have we didn't see Shan Yu that way. There was no way we were trying to make Shan Yu into this kind of a real, visceral, scary, intense, real villain, not a cartoony, over the top, you know, Gaston or something like that, or even Scar. We wanted him to be vicious and mean and cruel and intense, you know. I mean, Miguel Ferrer was doing his voice, for goodness sakes, you know. We couldn't think of him singing ever. So when we went away, and after we kind of, you know, picked our jaws up off the ground, we kind of talked about, well, what is he really asking for? The meat of what he's saying is he wants to know who Shan Yu is and what he wants. Okay, that's something we could deal with. Put the song idea away, the specific element of making that a song, and let's write a sequence that is that. And that was a good note. That was something that we needed to hear. That was something that we could connect with, and that was something we can work from. So we created the sequence that's in there based on that bogus note. from Michael Eisner. We made a joke song that I think was played at the rap party. One of the story guys, I think it was, did a rough storyboard of some crazy Shan Yu song, and it only played like at dailies or at the rap party. I can't remember which, and it was never seen again.
Instead, Shan Yu would become one of Disney's most treacherous and real villains.
The scene with the flag where it cuts to black, but he sticks a burning flag through the guy on the gate, on the Great Wall. We wanted to set that tone for him, that he was a very real threat. He was almost like a supervillain. He was so powerful and so strong and so determined, but also smart. You see him as a real thinker, like when they get the doll, right? Oh, this doll comes from, he asks his troops first, like a quiz, like, what do you see? And they're sniffing it, and there's this powder, and there's this, and they're giving him, and then he summarizes for him, this doll came from the Bojang Mountains, and he's like detective quality smart. He can put a story together. He knows what's going on. He's got a mission and he's got a goal, but he's also this unstoppable force of nature. He's this like typhoon that is just, nothing can stop from him getting to the point where he's going to take on that emperor, except for, and this is the dynamic that is so important to the story, except for there's this little girl in this little province of China, and how is she going to affect that bigger story? And that's what we tried to do with it, is if you open up with this bigger than life story, the world is on fire and everything's going to heck, and then there's this huge, dragon. How does the little cobbler work into that story and have an effect? That's what we wanted to do with Mulan in the beginning of the story, and so Shan Yu had to play that part.
We worked very hard, and we actually fought very hard creatively to tell the story that we ended up telling. And once we got it set in our head, we were sort of like pit bulls. We really wanted it to happen. The same thing happened with Ming-Na Wen's voice. I had heard her opening narration in the movie Joy Luck Club. I said, wow, what a voice. I wonder who that is. That's a cool voice. Wow. And so we found out, and I said, I think this is our person. I think this is our girl. This is the voice of Mulan. And, top studio brass that I should not mention by name said, oh, we should get somebody famous. She's not famous. We should get somebody well-known. And besides, I don't know if I really like her voice anyway. They're really kind of good. I don't know. So I fought and I fought and I fought for Ming-Na Wen. And fortunately, she's our voice of Mulan in the English-speaking versions of the movie.
Well, I'll back up and say we had a mandate put on us by the studio, Michael Eisner, all the big executives and stuff, to cast 100% Asian. And when I say Asian, we do have Japanese, Korean. They're not all Chinese. But at the time in the late 90s, when we made this, there was not a big pool of Asian American actors to go to. Certainly ones that had a name or any kind of marquee value was hardly at all. So, that's why we have Sulu, from Star Trek in there, and Pat Morita. There was, at the time, those were some of the bigger names that you could go to. So we had a first screening of the film that had 100% Asian actors in it, except for Eddie Murphy as Mushu, because he's a magical dragon, because he's, kind of from another world. It lended a creative freedom to us where we could kind of go any direction we wanted to. We had a kind of a Brooklyn-y, Timon type actors in there before. We tried some other things. It was actually Michael Eisner's idea to go after Eddie Murphy, and we loved that idea because it was just so diametrically opposed to Mulan and this little Chinese girl. But that very first screening that we did for Michael Eisner and for the rest of the crew, we had everybody but Eddie Murphy, Mushu, was Asian, and it fell flat. All the comedy was not playing. We had several comedy characters in there that we were trying to get jokes out of. Grandmother Fa was not funny, Yao. And after that screening, that mandate was kind of lifted, and Eisner and everybody said, well, maybe you can recast some of these, And so we looked at it really deeply and decided, let's get a new actor in for Yao. Let's recast Grandmother. And that's when we got Harvey Fierstein, and then June Foray came in for Grandmother. We did have an Asian actor for Shan Yu, and it just was not menacing. It just wasn't big enough. And it was our casting director that recommended Miguel Ferrer, and I loved it. I'd seen RoboCop and stuff, and he was in that, and I just loved his deep voice. And when he came in, it just knocked us on our butts. We were just so impressed with the delivery that he gave us. Barry and I both have daughters, and at the time, I think we had one each at least. We did want to make an impactful Disney female hero that was strong, that didn't need a man to help her. That was a big deal to us. We wanted her to be able to stand on her own 2 feet, to be passionate, to be so driven by what she knew was right and what she knew that she could do, that there weren't any limits. She has this limitless kind of strength within her. Personally, I wanted that for my daughters. I wanted them to see and have a Disney heroine that they could look up to for the next generation and generations to come and say, that's the hero for me. You know, that's the girl that I want to be. I can do anything if I set my mind to it. Well, yeah, and so many of the Disney features before that, you know, one of the parents would be gone or both of the parents would be gone, and it was about an orphan story like Aladdin. And we had this kind of commitment that we wanted to make a film where both parents were alive. They lasted the whole story, and we did that, and a grandmother to boot. So you know, we felt like a big success there in the Disney canon of films. It's important to Chinese culture too, the feeling of filial piety, about family, and you do things for the legacy of your family, for the respect of your family, to bring them honor and glory. That's a huge part of Chinese culture, and it's also therefore a big part of Mulan's story. We had to fight for the parents. There was many times that an executive or somebody would say, well, if we just get rid of the father, or maybe the mom, do we really need the mom? What do we need her for? You know, make it just about the dad and we'll save some footage and some line mileage or whatever. But, you know, we just felt strongly that, no, we're going to make the first Disney film with 2 parents.
The night where she leaves home, it's no dialogue, right? It's all just silent movie sort of stuff, just visual storytelling. And we knew that sequence had to happen for the story to happen. She had to leave home. There's no way around it. You know that scene's going to be in the movie in one shape, form, or the other. The scene where she leaves home was sort of the linchpin. We knew we had a movie when we had those 2 things storyboarded. We really felt like, yeah, this is going to be great.
In 1997, Eddie Murphy's films were dropping like flies. He was also stopped by police in 1997 for having a transsexual prostitute in his car in West Hollywood. Culture has changed since then, and the shock of this is far less than in 1997. But it didn't help that Eddie was also married at the time. Eddie's behavior was completely antithetical to the wholesome, historic Disney image, which even in 2018 led to the firing of director James Gunn for off-color tweets. However, back then, the image was swept under the rug so that they could get a falling star to be their wannabe guardian dragon.
I remember when we first started working with Eddie and he was cast as Mushu, there was concerns in the studio about his career kind of tanking. Every movie he was doing wasn't very successful. There was like Metro and Holy Man and some movies around that time that were not doing too well. He was kind of sinking in the box office and not as popular as he used to be. We wanted the Axel Foley, guy and that kind of success and that energy. But we got him at kind of a low point. I do remember that he was filming and it came out before us, The Nutty Professor. And that was like a big point in his career. That brought him back into the limelight because that did really well and it was very funny and well regarded. So that came out right before us, I think. And Eddie Murphy was great, a consummate professional. I'll say that up front. But it's funny, I think most people think that he improv'd a lot of his lines. I've had a lot of people ask me that over the years, and he really didn't. We knew we had Eddie Murphy coming into it, so our writers, our script writers, and all the dialogue that we did, the storyboard artists, we worked towards Eddie Murphy. And we had this Axel Foley type in our minds so clearly because of what he had done in the past that we started to work towards that. I think he surpassed that in a lot of ways. And he tried to be more unique and do something different. Like there was one time that we mistakenly, and this is one of the things that new directors do. They're not always so smart and wise. We asked Eddie Murphy, okay, in this scene, maybe after you say the line, you could do that, that Eddie Murphy laugh. We want the trademark Eddie Murphy laugh in this. Can you do that? He just got really serious and looked us in the eyes like, that's Axel Foley. That's not Eddie Murphy laugh. That's not me. That's that character. Don't ask me to do another character in your movie. What's the Mushu laugh? That's what we should be figuring out. And we were like, okay. And the funny thing is that, we would just say, hey, can you put a little laugh in at the end? And you would still hear the Eddie Murphy laugh. The thing that we were looking for still came out, but if we asked for it specifically, he would not give it to us. I always describe it as we were like the plumbers coming into his house because we did record mostly at his house. wherever he was is where we went. And he had it in his contract that we would come to him, that he never came out to LA, and he lived at the time in New Jersey in this big mansion where he had a recording studio in his basement. He fancied himself a pop singer. My girl wants to party all the time, party all the time, party all the time. That was his big hit, like in the early 90s, I guess it was. Because of that, we would go there and we would set up our equipment kind of with his equipment. We would be there for hours setting up, and then he would just walk in, do his thing, and then take off. And he was cordial and nice and stuff, but there was no hanging out. There was no let's shoot some pool, and I'd love to meet the kids, and hey, can I do a drawing for your little nephew there or something like that. It was just, he did his job and then he left. Then we had to pack up our stuff and leave out the back. The very first time that we met him, he came down in his bathrobe and he was just like, "Oh man, I can't believe it. I smell like a blimpie. Do you smell my hands? Do they smell like blimpie? I'm so sorry. I smell like blimpie. I just had a blimpie upstairs. Got vinegar and olive oil all over me. I smell like a blimpie." That's the first thing he ever told us. We're like, great, thank you.
Eddie Murphy telling Tony his hands smelled like a blimpie sandwich wasn't the only awkwardness that Tony faced with Mushu. Tony would also be directing his own brother for the first time, and Tom wanted to animate Mushu more than anything.
My brother was actually a part of Mulan before I came onto it, because he was in the Orlando, Florida studio working there still. And he was actually doing development on some of the characters, and he really wanted to do Mushu. That was a big part. And so I wasn't sure if he could do it. There was a lot of people that weren't sure, but they were waiting to cast all the characters until the second director came on, basically me, who they knew would have more of an animation background. So I was a big deciding vote in who got what part for all the supervising animator roles. And so I basically cast the film alongside Barry. And it was hard because, you don't want to show, any kind of preferential treatment to your twin brother. And there was that whole, what are people going to think if I give him one of the starring roles in the film, Mushu particularly. But he did some tests and he earned that part. He really did. He did some animation tests. There was a couple guys that did animation tests for Mushu. Both Barry and I fortunately agreed that Tom should get the role. The difficulty as we went through was I would be joking around, or I'd talk to him like a brother, "Oh, you knucklehead," and that kind of stuff. And the very next moment, I would have to turn around and say something as a director, "Make sure you get that scene done," or, "Oh, on this next scene, I wanted to tell you about this. This is really important." And he would have to do that switch in his mind. When is Tony speaking to me as his brother? When is he talking to me as my boss, And he did a great job. I give him a lot of credit for that, because I had so much on my plate. I couldn't worry about Tom and his emotions and how he was doing with all this. So he had to cope with a lot of things on his own, but he really did. We got through it and we had a great relationship. And when I was not directing and on the weekends and stuff, I was over at Tom's house and we were hanging out. We had our special relationship as twins, as brothers, but also when at work, that's when it was serious and I had to be his boss.
There was a moment in the film that it's a transition in the story, but I felt like sort of coming up with that idea, the nut of that idea, to me, I felt like, yes, I know what I'm doing here. And it's the moment where we had to transition from really making a very, very sad moment where Captain Shang puts up the little makeshift memorial to his father with the sword and the helmet, and Mulan adds a little doll. And the snow, to me, the snow is so important. I said, it should start snowing here. And everybody's like, why? I said, I don't know, but it just needs something needs to change. Something needs to be changing in the air. Something's changed in all the characters, right? For them, they were like, oh, this is serious now. We're not just training and belly aching about not having any girls around and missing our favorite dinners at home and joking around by the lake, skinny dipping. This is serious now. We're going into a war. How do we transition the characters? And I think maybe it was along the same point where I really felt like we're making a significant film here. We're not making a film that's going to be seen this year and never thought about. This film is going to last, and this film is going to have staying power through generations, I think. And I thought at that point, this is something that's not just the next movie coming out. It has some gravity to it. But I think sort of working in that moment of the story and working that transition And coming out of that transition and doing the comic relief of Mushu accidentally setting off a rocket right before the big battle, just giving the audience that laugh and that it's been so heavy for the last 5 minutes or 10 minutes of the film, been so heavy and so serious and so like a live action dramatic film, that breaking it with the comedic relief, but then also that being the trigger that notified the enemy they're in the valley, time to attack. Everyone's hair goes up on the back of their neck, and here comes Shan Yu and his troops over the ridge. That part of the story, it's a big transition in the movie, but also for me in the making of the film, I feel like it was a big transition, maybe in my confidence, but I just also felt for the sake of the movie, I felt very confident that, wow, we've got something now that's like more than a linchpin, but something that's like a core to this movie, has so much weight and foundation to it that it's going to work. It's going to work well. It's going to work well for the audience.
You know, I just thought of something too that was kind of a defining moment for me as a director on the film. It didn't come until the end of the movie, but I really felt like one of my most defining moments where I really stood up for myself as a director and for the movie specifically was working with Jerry Goldsmith. Jerry Goldsmith was our score composer. He was very famous for doing Star Trek theme and Rudy, and he won Oscars and stuff like that and Emmys. So Jerry came on the picture, and he was just kind of a force of nature. But there was a sequence that we had fallen in love with, the temp track that we had storyboarded to, and it was a Randy Edelman piece. I forget from what, but it's the sequence where Mulan goes in to her father's and her parents' room, grabs the conscription notice, cuts her hair, takes the uniform and the horse and rides off. And it starts with her sitting outside her parents' window, and it's raining, you know, and then all of a sudden, da-na, da-na, and there was this driving, da-na, and it was almost like cutting a music video, that sequence. It was one of the very first sequences that was boarded. It went through a lot of different iterations. Back in the day of Stephen Schwartz, there was a song there, and we took the song out and just found this score. Dean Dubois, who's now a big-time director at DreamWorks, having done How to Train Your Dragon, he was the one that storyboarded that sequence, or at least the final version of it, and he picked the score. We cut it to it. It was the very first sequence that became the tent post of what this movie was. We would show it to people all the time, and everybody loved it. So come to the end of the movie, after it's animated and Jerry is scoring stuff and he gets to scoring that sequence, we told him, well, it has to have this beat to it, and we tried to explain it to him without showing him or letting him hear the scratch track, because that can be insulting. That can be insulting to an artist, to a creative. So we just talked through it. We talked through what we wanted for the sequence, the beat, the kind of more the music feel as opposed to a scored over sequence. He went away and he sent us a synthesized version of it, and it was everything we didn't want. It was just scored over. It had all these emotional things, but the music was changing from scene to scene, and it was all over the place.
Yeah, it was really funny because here's Jerry Goldsmith. I mean, this is the greatest composer, arguably even to this day, probably one of the greatest film composers ever, right? He's up there with Maurice Jarre and John Williams. I mean, he's just like great composers, right? So basically we said, well, and he said, we still don't like that cue. It's not really working out the way we thought it would. Well, if you guys really don't like it, you're going to have to talk to Jerry about it. I think that was the word that came down from Peter Schneider, Tom Schumacher. Okay, so we made an appointment to go see him at his home on a Saturday morning. A maid, who was like a live-in maid, opened the door, and we're here to see Mr. Goldsmith. Oh yes, he's expecting you. Just go back past the swimming pool and that little house back there, go upstairs and wait for him upstairs. And so we went up there and waited, and we're sitting up there, and it's this little creative studio space. He's got a keyboard, and he's got some electronic recording equipment and things. He's got a couple of chairs in there, and we're waiting. We're on pins and needles, you know, because I play bluegrass fiddle. That's my ability, you know, so I'm not really that musically inclined. And Tony, I don't think Tony could carry a tune in a bucket. So we're not musical guys, really, right? And we've already done the movie with Jerry, and everything's worked out pretty good. I mean, excellent, really, except for this one cue we just didn't like, and it's the cue where Mulan's leaving home in it. And so we got to tell him. So we're sitting there in chairs waiting, and in two chairs, two identical chairs, side by side. And I sort of look on my shoulder because I didn't notice. And right between us on a shelf above our heads was an Oscar. You know, it's like going to the mountain to tell Muhammad something was not right in the last whatever. I don't know. It was just comical. The situation was comical. It didn't have a comedic end necessarily. We worked with Gary. He was very gruff that day. And okay, guys, I know what you're talking about. Okay, I'll try to make it more rhythmic and just more like a music video, more like a tune carrying it.
We went through that 2 or 3 times. Finally, he just threw his hands up and said, just let me listen to the darn scratch. All right, let me just hear it. And so we played it for him, and and it had this build to it and everything, and this beat. And he's like, oh, okay, I got it. He didn't even finish the whole thing. I got it. No, I got it. All right, I know what you're going for. He goes off again. By this point, we're actually starting to record on the stage some of the other score. We have the movie is paying for all this money for orchestra to come out. We got a stage, and he's starting to compose the music, but we still haven't heard this final one. So he invites us over to his house, Barry and I, and we're sitting on these chairs, and he's like, okay, guys, I got it. I think I know what you want. This is it. And he plays it for us. Still not quite there. This is probably the 4th iteration by this point, and he's at his wit's end, and he is upset at us. You know, we're first-time directors and all this kind of stuff, and there's that feeling in the air. But we talk to him again, and we just take it slow. Well, Jerry, you know, it still doesn't have that beat, and it's got to have that driving thing. And, you know, we cut to these beats, and the animation is done. It's got to really fit in there. And so it's, all right. I'll get it right. No problem. I've never done this before, but I'll do it again. He goes away, and he rewrites the score again. But this time, we don't hear it until we're on the stage. He's got a full 80-piece or 120-piece, I forget what it was, orchestra of musicians there. This is the most expensive time on a movie, is during this kind of moment where you're paying for engineers and the recording space and all the orchestra, and everybody is in the sound engineering booth. There's the head of animation and the vice president of animation, the music supervisor, Pam Coates, the producer, and then Barry and I, and probably 12 other people and assistants too. So he had scored some pieces. Everything was going well that day. Everybody's in a good mood. And he goes, okay, so here's the sequence. I'm going to go out. I'm going to play for you. We're going to record one. We'll just lay one down for you guys. But you know what? You're going to love it. It's going to be great. You're going to love it. And it's better. It's better. But it's still not quite there. And as Jerry's out there in the room with the orchestra, I'm looking around at everybody else, trying to get a temperature of the room and the engineering booth with all the executives and mostly Barry, my partner. Like, what do you think? We're all kind of shaking our heads. No, it's not quite there. And I feel like we have some agreement. Jerry ends with the orchestra. He walks into the sound booth and he's like, what do you guys think? Great, right? We got it. We nailed it. All of a sudden, there's just crickets. There's just nobody says a word. And I'm looking around going, I know we were just talking about this. And I'm looking at Barry and he's Pam and the executives in the background, they're all mum. So finally I decide, out of my, youthful bliss, I guess, and confidence of I'm going to support this film and I know it can be better. I stand up and I said, well, Jerry, if it just, and I couldn't even get the rest of the sentence out, and a volcano of expletives and shouts and yells came my way. It was like one of those Tom and Jerry cartoons where his hair's going back and as Jerry's blowing in my face and just cursing like a sailor, all this stuff about, what do you know, you don't know, and you're just a junior director, and all this kind of blah, 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 and I've been working on this, I've never had this, and so all this kind of righteous indignation comes out of him. I take it, I just sit there and take it, and I finally just say, but Jerry, it could be better. And luckily, fortunately, I had a very specific idea. You can't stand up against Jerry Goldsmith and just say, well, it could be better. I just said, Jerry, if there's this beat here and there's this instrument, if we could just bring that out more and this and that. I suggested a couple tweaks. Luckily, the music supervisor then finally got up out of his seat and supported me. Yeah, Jerry, that might be good. Let's try that. And he calmed down enough and he said, fine. All right. He goes back in, does it with the orchestra right there. And it was the take that's in the movie. It was perfect. But it was that moment that I really felt like a director in a weird way, because I stood up to somebody that was a big bear of a man and had this strength of will, and yet I had to come up above that and say, but that's not what's right for the movie. I know I had heard what was right. I knew that there was something better that could be in that moment, and that's what I was fighting for. I wasn't fighting Jerry Goldsmith. I was fighting for what could be better. The potential of that sequence was so important to me. That's what I was fighting for, and finally I feel like Jerry got there, and the rest is history.
And I'm still not happy with the cue, and I don't think Tony is either, but it's just the way it goes sometimes, you know. But all in all, I'd say that Jerry Goldsmith was one of the true highlights of my career, to be able to work with him. When you start on a movie, you think, oh, here's the way this movie should be. But there's a certain point that happens in every single project where the project begins telling you what it needs. It's like Audrey 2, Feed Me. And it really tells you very specifically, no, I don't need that. I need this. Oh. It really starts demanding its own way. If you listen to it, if you refuse to listen to it, if you refuse to see what it's turning into and how it's coming to life, then you can miss the boat on it. But I think at some point it had established itself as a story, as a look, as a tone, everything else, that it probably the last half of production, it was telling us what it needed at every turn. And it's funny because Ron and John, I remember one time they told a group of us, I think they were doing like a little lecture on directing, and they said, you're trying to get the movie made, you're trying to make a movie, you're trying to make a movie, you're trying to make a movie, you're trying to make a movie. And then this day comes, you're trying to finish this movie. So it comes from trying to make it to trying to finish it. It's like turning over a page or something. It suddenly is upon you. Oh, now we got to get it finished. And then it's just really tender love and care and making sure that it doesn't get harmed on its way out of the cradle or whatever that is.
You know, to paint the picture for you, we were this little studio, the little engine that was out in Orlando, Florida. We had never made our own feature together. We probably had one of the greenest crews of any Disney feature, going back to maybe Snow White. Our crew was mostly all animators and cleanup people and artists that came from art schools directly to that studio in Orlando, Florida. Never worked with a lot of the senior guys and got that kind of discipleship and mentorship. And here we were making our own feature, and nobody expected Mulan to be good. They wanted it to be good, obviously, but nobody had that high expectation of us. And because of that, it kind of put a chip on our shoulder of wanting to prove ourselves as a studio. And people on that film like bonded like crazy. I mean, our crew was like a family. We cared, and we were so passionate about that movie and everybody on it. I tell people all the time that Mulan could not have been made anywhere else in the world and come out as good as it did, I think. And it was really because of this green crew that just were like a family that worked so hard into the night, that gave their all and sacrificed it all and left it on the art table for Mulan. It was awesome. But we didn't have that expectation that we were going to be big or successful. We felt like we were making our own little backyard film. You know what I mean? It wasn't like we were making a Disney feature. We didn't feel that way the whole time. It felt like we're just making our own little backyard film. Maybe I hope people come and see it and like it. The defining moment was every couple years the studio would do like a whole studio-wide meeting where the executives and the directors would talk about the next 5 years of projects that are coming up. The very first day of that, they wanted to screen Mulan in its entirety, and it was not all animated. There was storyboards in it, some animation, some color, so it was at that kind of a stage. And we screened it for the whole studio. There was this feeling like, man, the films are just going down. They're not doing as well. And there was this sense of like anxiousness about their jobs, you know, and where animation is going. And they could see that Lion King was well behind, and the success of Lion King was well behind us. And now the films are just going down in the box office. Pixar was having huge success, and our movies were not doing well. And there was an uneasiness. And so we screened the film, and people were reacting. They were laughing, and they were into it. But, you know, when it's the crew, when it's other animators, when it's professionals, they don't laugh as much as a regular audience. They're very critical, you know, so they tend to hold their cards pretty close to their chest and that kind of thing. But when it ended, it was quiet. We didn't really know what people thought. And then all of a sudden, there was this huge gush of clapping and cheering. And as the lights went on, people stood up, and there was a standing ovation. These were from executives, these are from story people, animators, all of our peers. in the Burbank, California studio, they all stood up and started cheering us. And unfortunately, the whole crew that made it was back in Orlando, Florida. They didn't get to experience this moment. But Barry and I and Pam and Chris Sanders and some of the heads of departments were there. And they literally wouldn't stop clapping until we stood up and kind of took a bow. And to me, that was the most special moment of Mulan. Everything after that, I didn't care about. I really didn't care about how it came out in the theater. For me, that moment of getting the adoration of our peers in California meant that the Florida studio got it right. And they were encouraged. It made them feel better about where the company was going and that this movie was coming out. Maybe it'll be a success. Maybe they won't lose their jobs. It was all that mixed in there. But more than anything, it was that feeling that Orlando, Florida got it right. Our little studio did it.
Because Hercules was a disappointment at the box office, Disney cut costs and only gave half of Hercules' advertising budget to Mulan.
And it explained so much to me as to why Mulan didn't do as well as I wanted it to or thought it might. All the reviews were great. I mean, people were loving it and liking it and all this, and yet it didn't make as much as, some of the movies that had come out even just a couple of years before. And so hearing that 20 years later that they had kind of shortchanged us on our marketing because of Hercules and stuff, all of a sudden made sense. In a way, it kind of made me feel a little better, I guess, about things too, because I wanted it so badly to be a bigger success than it was. But knowing that they had kind of shortchanged us on the marketing explained a lot.
From the day I started on it to the day we walked out of Technicolor, when the final release print was color timed, it was about 5 years to the day that I had started on it. And it's funny because after Mulan came out and it was pretty successful and it was a good movie and, great story and well told, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, he invited me over to DreamWorks, and, it's just sort of like, you want to come over here and work for a while? And I didn't, but he thanked me. He said, I just want to thank you for Mulan. He says, because I have 2% of the profits on that movie. And like, thanks, Jeffrey. Wish I had that.
It was known to be a success. I mean, not regarded as a huge success like Lion King or anything, but they thought of it as success, a little blip on the world of money coming into Disney, I guess. But it was a different time. When I came out of Mulan, I started to see pretty quickly that times were changing. Pixar was doing extremely well. Right around the corner was talk about not doing any more 2D animation. Things were shifting, and I didn't have a crystal ball or anything, but I started becoming restless too. After coming off of Mulan, they had me in development for 6 months, and I had an opportunity to develop a bunch of movies. I pitched several different movies. I want to do an Irish Parable, and I pitched this giant movie, and now they're working on a giant thing, or they were recently. I pitched a superhero movie, and then they did The Incredibles years later. I pitched a Puss in Boots idea and concept, and then DreamWorks did Shrek and with Puss in Boots. I kept pushing these ideas that I felt like were new and original that weren't being done. They were all getting pushed aside. They were all being rejected. And I started realizing that something's going on here, and I'm not getting connected to another project, even some other projects that were in development. There was a lot of directors and projects on the runway to take off. So I could tell that even if I got onto a project, it would not be in production probably for 5 to 7 years because of how many they already had lined up. And I'm like, I couldn't wait. I didn't want to do that. So I went back in animation. I missed drawing and animating. I animated Kronk on Emperor's New Groove. And then right after that, I started really feeling like I wanted to start my own animation company and feeling like it was time to leave. And so I did. I left and I started my own company called Tenacious Family Entertainment with a couple buddies from my church.
While Tony was on his way out, Barry was busy developing another film for the Florida studio.
It's called My Peoples. I've been developing it for about 2 years, and we had a green light for production. My Peoples was a hybrid film, 2D and CG together. And that was sort of a tougher film to make, but we felt pretty confident we could do it in Florida since we had a lot of people training in CG, but we had also a lot of experienced 2D animators. But the vision I had for the movie, the look of the movie, sort of depended on that hybrid. Dolly Parton was doing a voice. We had great bluegrass musicians doing a lot of music. Because Oh Brother, Where Art Thou became famous and it became the top-selling soundtrack album a couple of years before, that was the only reason I even got their attention with this idea, because that had been such a successful movie. But the basic pitch was, the foundational part was sort of Hatfields and McCoys. It's two families that had never gotten along, that set in the Appalachian Mountains, and the two young people in the family who fall in love with each other. And one of them was a folk artist. He was a guy who made these, for lack of a better term, these dolls, sort of these wooden dolls that were crafted out of metal, and some were made of old lawnmower engines and different parts and stuff like that, but they all represented relatives that he knew in the past, or people from his side of the family. And one was a little angel that really represented his mom. And he made this little angel as a gift for the girl he loved. But magically, when this angel was brought to life, she wasn't about to go down and woo this girl to become part of their family. But she still had a great prejudice against that other family. So it's basically about an angel who doesn't want to do her job. And that was the Dolly Parton part.
Mulan producer Pam Coates was integral to the film's success. But when she was promoted to executive VP of creative development, it came with an unfortunate task.
Pam Coates was a fantastic producer, and, you know, the success of the movie, I think, owes so much to her. But it's funny because she was the actual person who told me that the studio was closing and then my movie wasn't going to get made, and that I no longer had a job at Feature Animation. It was sort of ironic in that regard. But we remain friends, and we see each other whenever we can, and she's great.
David Staten, president of Walt Disney Feature Animation, sent out an email to the studio to explain why My Peoples had been shut down, which read, "The fundamental idea is not strong enough or universally appealing enough to support the kind of performance our movies must have today." After Mulan, Lilo and Stitch, and Brother Bear, My Peoples would have been the fourth Disney feature made in Florida.
But I do think, and I'm pretty sure, that, you know, just the whole 9/11 thing in 2001, a lot of companies all around the world just began contracting in terms of what they were willing to spend and what they were willing to do and what the future held and everything else. And when Disney began closing their studio, they had a TV studio in Sydney, Australia. They closed it. They had one in Tokyo, Japan. They closed it. Their Paris studio, which did parts of features, they closed that. So we sort of knew we were next on the list, you know. My project came down to, it was either my project or Mark Dendel's project, Chicken Little. And I think the big decision was Chicken Little was already in Burbank, and Chicken Little was all CG. So, you know, in some ways, Chicken Little was sort of the easier pill to swallow for the studio for its first CG feature. And in the end, Michael Eisner, he didn't tell me personally, but what was told to me was the reason they weren't going to make the film is it was too colloquial, it was too specific to a region of the United States, and they didn't feel like it would have universal appeal as a story. And I would disagree highly with that, because if you look to movies like, I don't know, My Big Fat Greek Wedding or something like that are culturally specific but have sort of the human condition is the same no matter where you go, and you know, relationships and everything else, no matter what culture you're in, no matter what situation. So that was sort of his official line to me of why they decided not to make the movie. And it's all Disney's property because, you know, they paid me to develop it, and with the agreement that it would be theirs regardless of what happened, you know, whether it got made or not. I knew I couldn't get it made on my own necessarily, but so yeah, this is still sitting over there in their ARL, their Animation Research Library. But everybody in feature animation sort of knows about the project and knows of it and thinks it would have been a very, very unique film at the time, maybe, and a very I don't know, just something really fresh, you know, and something really different. But, yeah, I guess it wasn't meant to be. But.
On January 12, 2004, CNN reported that Disney would close the animation studio in Florida and cut 260 jobs.
It was terrible. I don't know how else to describe it. It was horrible. It was just absolutely heartbreaking. Walt Disney World kept calling me saying, "We found a box with your name on it in a warehouse 87 over here. Can you come pick it up?" So I was picking up boxes out of various warehouses all over Disney property for like the next 6 months. It was crazy. and so, but it was, I'm thankful for 22 years at Disney, 22 plus years at Disney. You know, you look back right now and say, well, you know, it's been great. Whenever it was, studio closed 2004. It's been like 14 years. It's been great 14 years. Some lean times, some good times, some fat times, but some really interesting work and things. So yeah, but you know, the studio closing and that whole group of talent breaking up and basically being blown to the four corners, well, it was heartbreaking. I don't know how I should put it. It was just absolutely, it was like your house burning down. You know, everybody got out alive, but barely. But everything you loved sort of burned to the ground.
For more behind-the-scenes stories from animation, check out the Bancroft Brothers podcast hosted by Tony Bancroft and his brother Tom Bancroft on iTunes.